Welcome, friends, to part 2 of my interview with Bernie Clarke. We'll get to that in just a moment. So thanks for coming back. If you have not listened to part 1, you are going to want to go back and listen to part 1 because we kind of left off with a little bit of a teaser partway through a rather juicy topic that we're going to jump right into in this episode. So if you haven't listened to part 1, pause this, go back and listen to part 1. Before we dive right into this second episode, I just want to read a little podcast love. This was on YouTube, actually. It's by Geraldine F. I loved this. I'm from a hatha background, about to start my 200-hour training, but have done some yin classes, which I loved, and I want to do and learn more. From this one podcast, I learned more about yin yoga than I did in those classes. I love the free and easy yet informative way in which Nick shares her knowledge. Thanks, Geraldine. Appreciate that. And if you've been listening for a while, if you're a regular and you haven't offered a podcast review, I'd be super grateful if you would. You could do that in several ways. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can leave me a comment. If you are listening on Spotify, there's comments below the episode. You could leave me a comment and you can go into the Spotify app and leave me 5 stars. And on Apple, you can do 5 stars and you can also leave a written review. So it really warms my heart to hear from you all when you enjoy an episode, or if you're enjoying the show, if you're finding it helpful with your practice or with your teaching. Hearing that little bit of feedback actually really means the world. I know I've said this before, and I will say it again. I love this podcast. It's a labor of love, but they are a lot of work. So when I get this little feedback from you, I know I'm on the right track and I should just keep going, keep trucking with the podcast. So if you are new around here, welcome. A little reminder before we jump into part 2 of my episode with Bernie is that although I have the soul of a mermaid, I have the mouth of a sailor. This is an adult podcast, adult subject matter, and adult language. So if you have small people around, take a moment to grab some headphones now. This one will be, you'll be rolling right into the conversation, right where we left off from last week's episode. And again, if you haven't listened to that, go listen to that one first. And I hope you enjoy this. Yes,
Said,
that's where I wanted to go.
there are some people who are naturally stiffer than other people. And unless they're warmed up in a hot room, they can't even get into the pose.
Yeah.
Like you think of caterpillar, Paschimottanasana. Some people can only do the pose. They're trying to come forward so gravity can draw them down, but they're so tight in the hamstrings, they're fighting gravity just to stay upright. So they have to engage all the muscles. But you let them warm up and their hamstrings release a bit, now they can finally get into the shape and relax. So for them, the only time they can actually do the practice is when they're warmed up.
Yes.
And you're going to say to these guys, no, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. But I enjoy it. I'm getting benefit from it. No, that's wrong. You can't do it that way. So.
Yeah. And I think that, it is controversial. There's so many people out there that say that just the thought of hot yin is like impossible because yin is cool and you're heating the body.
Relative to what? Hot water is yin compared to boiling water.
Exactly. I mean, and then there are people that have perhaps legitimate concerns that sometimes when you're really hot, you can go too far in a pose muscularly, you can pull a muscle. But I can tell you from experience, that can happen in a vinyasa weekend workshop too. I did a workshop with an overzealous adjuster once in a vinyasa workshop and ended up pulling my hamstring, and that was just my own body's warmth.
Yeah, if somebody has that concern and it's legitimate, then don't do hot yoga. But don't let everyone say nobody else should ever do it.
Yes. And I would say as a teacher, from my experience, there's kind of 2 styles of yoga that tend to attract A-type competitive athletic folks, Ashtanga and Hot. And so you may have to guide with your words a bit more we're actually not trying to do the fullest version we can. We're actually trying to you may just have to encourage those students to back away a little bit so that they don't think that this is Cirque du Soleil that they're competing for. And that can help prevent injury. I always do it with jokes because that's just the way my brain works. But I've personally done what I would consider not taught, but attended a class back when I was in Calgary That wasn't really a hot yin, meaning the room wasn't heated while you were in the room, but it was a hot class right before. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
even when you turned the heat off, it was a hot room. Would it have been my preference? No, but I really liked that teacher and the time slot worked well for me. And I'm obviously a
Yeah.
big yin fan. And so I did it. But yeah, I really just wanted to address that whole heat and can't you do hot yin? And then the other thing I'd like to say on that from a teacher's perspective is I don't teach hot yoga. I don't enjoy hot yoga. I think that there are some, I think that there has been a bit of a, unfortunately, trying to think of an accurate word, maybe a downgrading of the intention of yoga as hot yoga has become so popular, because there are so many people that, especially younger generations, that were attracted to it because they were looking to get a workout and to detox, that sometimes the myriad of other benefits other than the physical of yoga get lost in that.
Right.
And at the same time, because there's always an and, if people come to that practice and that allows them to come to their mat and to build a consistent practice, and it helps their body and it helps their nervous system and it helps their mind, and maybe, just maybe, it stokes that little yoga fire in them, that then they do go on and try other styles and maybe try to meditate and do other things. That if you were to remove that from the, if we just imagine the yoga scape and we just suddenly took away hot yoga, that how fewer people we would have that would later eventually be going into these deeper practices, because they didn't have that sort of, accessible, meet them where they're at mentally, emotionally version of yoga that made them feel like, oh, I could do yoga because I'm going to go sweat and detox and get my workout.
Yeah.
And that can evolve into something that becomes much deeper over time.
Yeah. Like you, I don't really care what brings somebody to the mat. All I care is that they come to the mat, and eventually the evolution will take them where they hopefully really need to or want to go. I
Mm-hmm.
personally don't like hot yoga. I'm pitta already, and it just makes me throw up and pass out. I don't like Kundalini yoga because it's a bit too vigorous, but that doesn't mean other people don't get benefits from it. And I'd never
Mm-hmm.
deny that to them. So that's human variation. We have
Yeah.
all these different paths, and there's lots of different paths to the ocean. So it doesn't really matter how you get there as long as you're on that journey. But
Yeah.
there are some paths that are higher risk. There's a reason why insurance rates for hot yoga studios are quite a bit higher than
Mm-hmm.
for non-hot yoga studios.
And hot
It
yoga
is
teachers
riskier.
as
Yeah,
well. Yeah. Yeah. There is risk there for sure. And it might be exactly what someone needs.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the students that come to my training, to take their yin training, whether I'm their first training or their second or their third or their 10th yin training, because I get a lot of that. I'm sure you do too, people that have taken shorter
yeah,
trainings elsewhere. And I actually really love that, because I think that each yin teacher trainer has their zone of genius that they're going to just like dive deep into their training. And then the person next to them might have a totally different zone of genius. And
right,
so if you're madly in love with yin, why wouldn't you want to take, it's just like other forms of yoga. You don't just take your 200 hour and then go, oh, I'm good for the rest of my life, I'm never going to take any more training, right?
right,
You want to, and I feel like yin is the same way. Like, I know, for example, in your training, you go over things in depth that I don't even touch on, because that's
right,
your zone of genius. Whereas I probably go into things in depth that you don't touch on because it's my
right.
particular zone of genius. So
Yeah,
it's the same thing with styles of yoga. If hot yoga is what gets them to the mat and they don't injure themselves, hopefully, and that sparks a love of yoga, then I say that's a win.
yeah, exactly. Same.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, because there's been a whole podcast on this, insert eye roll for those of you who cannot see me right now, who have been prattling on and on about the performance deficit from static stretching. And I know you've talked about this in depth.
Hmm.
And I think you might even have a PDF. And if you do, I'll put it in the show notes. I know you've got another PDF that I use often. I'll put that one in the show notes as well. But it is temporary, yes? This
Yeah,
performance deficit.
there's been a cycle of views over the last 40 years of whether you should warm up and stretch before doing sports. And I won't go through the whole cycles of the years. Yes, I have written about this. But I think the current understanding right now is the effect of stretching and warming up before an athletic performance is minor. It's on the order of 1 to 4%. Now, if you're an Olympic athlete, 4% slower in a 100-meter dash
That's a lot.
means that you don't qualify for the final heat. It's the difference between gold and nobody knows your name. But for a weekend warrior, that 4%, you won't notice it. It's not going to really reflect in your personal best. Or if you're a tennis player or a hockey player, just a weekend player, you're not going to notice it. Definitely warming up and stretching a little bit will reduce injuries. And especially if you do it after the practice. After you've done your sports, do some stretching to help reduce the chance of injuries. Now, if you're a hockey player, or in Canada, we can talk about hockey, and you're a goaltender, and you've got to do the splits in order to stop the puck, you want to warm up and stretch before you get onto the ice. But having stretched out those things, remember we talked about springs? If you have a looser, more compliant spring, it's not going to react as quickly as a stiff spring. So the more you warm up your springs, the slower your reactions are going to be. And that may result in a quite slower performance. Now, you don't want to do 2 hours of yin yoga before going onto the ice and being a goalie, because you'll be so mellow, you'll think, oh, here comes the puck. Oh, whoops, or here comes another puck. No, you still need some snappiness into your springs, but you need to be able to do the full splits. So everyone's got to figure out what works best for them. But in general, this whole, should I warm up, should I stretch? Definitely warm up. Everyone agrees you should warm up before doing any sort of thing. But that's only 5 or 10 minutes. Just get the blood flowing to the muscles so they're ready to take the instantaneous stresses. Should you stretch? Well, if you overstretch, you're going to lose 1 to 4% of your performance. For me, that's trivial. So I don't mind stretching and warming up for 10, 15 minutes before I play pickleball or golf, because it's not really going to have a big effect. But if you're an elite athlete, okay, warm up, but don't stretch. Save the stretching for afterwards.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that you couldn't, on your off day, your non-training day, as an athlete, go to a yin class and then tomorrow go back to your training routine, right? Like I think
because that's
somewhere
going to
people
build
thought this was like a
springiness.
lasting, permanent thing. And it will have come out before your episode. I did interview Tiffany Cruikshank, who works with a lot of athletes. And so we talked a little bit more in depth about this. And she's got great perspectives on that too. So if people are interested, they could go back and listen to that too. But yeah, the thing I guess I wanted to highlight is that when you hear people say that if you do static stretching before your workout or whatever, that you'll be weaker, again, they're oversimplifying and overstating, and that the weakness is temporary. It's not like tomorrow, oh, now I can't go do my weights because I did a yin yoga class yesterday.
Well, the whole point of exercise is to weaken the tissues. And then the tissues adapt and become stronger. So to say, I don't want to be weak before I do my weightlifting. Well, after your weightlifting, you're really weak.
Yeah.
Because you just stressed those tissues a lot.
Yeah.
So
You want bigger
don't be
biceps.
afraid of being temporarily weak, because through SAID, specific adaptation to imposed demand, that's how the body gets healthier and stronger.
Yeah. You're sending the body the signal, you need to pay attention here. Yeah. Right. This one was fascinating, and I'll get you to explain it, but I also just want to mention that Bernie was kind enough to send me a video explaining this. So I will link that in the show notes, a little YouTube video as well, but we'll get Bernie to chat on it as well. I have never heard before until I read your book. Remove wristwatches and anything that is metallic that makes a complete circle around the body. Does that include rings?
Yes.
Okay. So
necklaces, rings, anything that makes a circle. If it's a cutout and it's not a complete circle, don't worry about it. But if it's a complete round piece of metal, it may affect the flow of energy in the body. Now, that's the speculation I have. I first heard this from Saul David Ray, my Thai yoga massage teacher, who said that we should be careful of metal rings. The Taoists say, now I don't know where he got it from, and I haven't heard any Taoists saying this. It's just something that he told me. But later when I met Paul Grilly, and Paul told me about Dr. Moriyama, as in his experiments with the flow of electricity through the water-filled areas of the body, then it all clicked into place. So I'm going to back up a bit. Again, coming from the physics point of view, In the early 1800s, there was a guy in England called Michael Faraday, and he was playing with electricity and magnetism. And he discovered if I have a wire and I move a magnet along that wire, it induces an electric current.
Mm.
And conversely, a guy named Lenz, Lenz, who's from Estonia, he was verifying a lot of Faraday's early experiments. And he noticed that when I move a magnetic object through a metal cylinder, it creates an electric current. But the electric current also creates a magnetic field.
Mm.
Electricity and magnetism are just two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. So electricity can create magnetism, magnetism can create electricity when we're dealing with metal circles. So the video that I sent you demonstrates Lenz's law. It's in the 1800s, all these people were discovering these things, so they got the law named after them. When you put a current through a circle, you create a magnetic field, and that will resist the flow of the current.
Interesting.
So now, Murayama is saying that through our body, we actually create little conduits of electricity. He thinks that's one of the forms of qi.
Right.
And when we move and when we're doing our yoga practice, qigong, tai chi, yin, yang practices, we're creating little electric currents through the body. Now, if we happen to have a metal circle around that area, it's creating what's called a back EMF, a back resistance to that flow of electricity.
Oh.
So Lenz's law is well defined, we know that. But not everyone agrees that these activities create electric currents. But we think that's how acupuncture works. The work of Helene Langevin and her crew from the 2000 to 2012 or so, she mapped out where these water-filled spaces are, and she discovered they were not in the muscle and tendon, but in the fascia around them and in the kind of interfaces between the fascial areas. So she mapped them out for the arms, and they lined up pretty closely to what Dr. Murayama was finding. So if we understand that qi, one form of qi is electrical, and if it flows through the fascia of the body, then if we put a metal circle around it through Lenz's law, we're going to actually reduce that flow of energy. So that's why I say speculate with, try it, try your exercise with and without it, especially if you're an energy healer and you can sense energy very easily. Most people can't sense energy, they're not going to notice the difference. But metal rings, and the worst, according to Saul David Ray, is the belly button ring. He said, you're short-circuiting the gate of life. In the ear, it's okay in the earlobe, but not in the cartilage of the ear. He said, if you're ever going to get body piercings, and I would add body piercings that include metal circles, not just pieces of metal, make sure you have an acupuncturist do it, because they'll know where to put it and where not to put it.
Except they won't do it. An acupuncturist is going to be like, wait a minute, you want me to pierce your ear? No, thank you. They're going to be like, why would I do that? Right. Yeah. Interesting. That's so fascinating. I mean, I sometimes wear necklaces, but I take them off to practice anyway, just because they're in the way.
Right.
It's very interesting. And I was going to say, and even in my ears, I tend to most of the time wear semi-precious stones. I do have one through the cartilage that is metal, but it's not a ring, it's a pole.
Yeah, it's just a piece of metal with a stud.
Yeah.
That's not creating a circuit. It has to be a complete closed loop. So that video I shared with you, you can visually see it. They drop a pencil down a tube, a metal tube, and the pencil just falls at the speed of gravity. Then they put a magnet in it, they drop it here, and you're waiting, and eventually the magnet falls out. Because as the magnet moves, it creates electric current in the cylinder, and the electric current creates an opposite magnetic field that slows down the magnet. Well, the same thing would be happening. The qi that's flowing through our body, if we have a metal ring around it, it is getting slowed down or retarded through that.
That is so trippy. So that's
my speculation. I've got no proof that actually happens to the body. I'm just saying Lenz's law says this, and if we do have electrical qi flowing the body,
A plus B could equal C.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. And again, those of you that want to check out the video, I will link it in the show notes of the episode so that you can check that out. There is a couple of here that are not questions. They're just thank yous. So yes. Page 201, your section on bulging discs. As somebody who's a yoga therapist and has helped people with back pain for 17, 18 years, thank you. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you. Because in yoga, people are obsessed with seated forward folds.
Yeah.
And for some people, that is the worst thing you can do. I like to just say, just flip them on their back and do the same pose, put them against a wall, give them a strap, something that's a little bit more bulging disc friendly. So I just wanted to really thank you for that, because I feel like that is something that most yoga teachers don't have a lot of information on, back health. And, 80 to 85, depending on the statistic you've just listened to, a percent of people will have back issues at some point in their life. And for many, it's persistent or chronic. So it's something that I think more yoga teachers, even if they don't want to specialize in it, should at least have an awareness of, because odds are you've got people in your class with back issues.
Yeah.
And many of those are bulging discs are not at all rare,
No.
to have someone in your class that either is currently struggling with it or has in the past. So for those of you that want to read that, that's on page 201. That was a thank you. And then the other thank you was, I really noticed it in your latest edition, was thank you for adding some upper body poses pictures in,
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And because, I'll have done, before this episode comes out, I'll have done a whole episode on my journey with upper body yin and how I love the practice, but it always felt incomplete for me as somebody who's really very tight and restricted in the upper body from my years of being a hairdresser and a bodybuilder. And so I just instinctively, when I would go study with Paul, and then I would come home and I would take some of the things I did in my other yoga, whether it's arm stretching, shoulder stretching, or laying on blocks or putting a bolster here. And I would just instinctively start doing them in a yin way, and noticed huge benefits from doing that. So I love that you added more of those upper body things.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, because I know people will say, oh, well, there isn't any upper body stuff in the yoga books. I'm like, yes, there is. Go look at Bernie's book. And then, of course, I think most teacher trainings that when the teacher itself, like myself or you, that guides upper body stuff, obviously you're going to learn that in a teacher training. You're going to learn more upper body stuff. Yeah. And then I was wondering, so I've heard this from you, and I've heard it linked to Sarah as well, these next 2 points, actually. And of course, whenever I talk to Sarah, I will ask her own opinion about these things. But sometimes, again, with the telephone game, and maybe this is a bit of a bone to pick with me, because I did go study Chinese medicine for 3 years. I did not finish my program because I realized that I don't actually want to put needles in people. So I'm going to be diving into medical Qigong study, because I absolutely love Chinese medicine. I'm a big nerd with it, but just the needling part left me going. There's this statement that is made often that yin yoga accesses the meridians the same as acupuncture. And that drives me crazy. I'll just say, excuse me, not that yin yoga doesn't have an effect on the meridians. Of course it does. But saying that it's same to acupuncture is where I think things can get off course, or that it's the same as acupressure. Because when we're doing our yin practice, I think we're accessing the meridians, but I actually would think more accurately, the sinew channels are affected. But in a more gross way, right? In a more kind of larger scale way. Whereas in acupuncture, it's very specific, kind of point by point. And there's so much diagnosis that goes into which point you do for what. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to just talk a little bit about your thoughts on how we're working with the meridians in yin, and how that may or may not be, by your view, different than acupuncture.
When I first took a class with Sarah, she mentioned there was 4 ways to stimulate energy. She said the first way we don't do, acupuncture. We're not licensed to stick needles in people. But the second way is acupressure, and then directed awareness, and then breathwork. So she was the one that first brought to my awareness that our yoga practice could stimulate the flow of qi through the classical organ meridians. Now, I've never really dove deep into traditional Chinese medicine. I've done some superficial reading. I've read 3 or 4 books. I've listened to Sarah. I've read most of Dr. Moriyama's books that are in English. So I have made an attempt to go into that. And I've also looked at studies by, I mentioned Haline Langevin and some other people. So I can kind of understand where they're coming from. But in the second edition to the Complete Guide to Yin Yoga, where I talk about how these poses may affect the meridian lines, I use that word may. Whereas in the first edition, I was a little bit more dogmatic about it. This will stimulate chi flow through this meridian line. I can't really say it will. As I learn more, as you said, once you read a book, it's fixed. And I wish I could go back and soften some of that up. So in the second edition, I had the chance to do that. But let's dial back a bit. And again, from a physics point of view, look at what happens to the body in acupuncture and then during our poses. We have two theories as to how acupuncture may work. I don't think there's any debate anymore that does acupuncture work. Definitely acupuncture works. It has an effect in the body. That's been observed in many experiments and repeated. It doesn't necessarily do everything that was claimed over the last 3,000 years. It won't reverse a vasectomy and all these sorts of things.
Neither does yoga. To all the things they've claimed, yes.
No, right. There was no truth in advertising back in those days. But it does definitely affect the body. So the question now is how? How does it affect the body? Well, the two main theories we have is one is, again, from Helene Langevin point of view, when you put the needle into the tissue, you don't just put it in there and leave it. You have to wiggle it, you twist it, you pull on it. The practitioner wants to feel diki, that tugging on the needle.
Yeah.
So what her observations have shown is, with ultrasound and other things, when you actually look at the diki, when you turn the needle, the collagen fibers inside the superficial fascia become wrapped around the end of the needles. So as you're turning it, you're putting a mechanical stress into the tissues. Now, living within those kind of scaffolds of collagen fibers are cells called fibroblasts, and they're the ones that produce the fibers. They are like a spider sitting in the middle of the web. And imagine if you've got a spider in the web and you elongate the web, the spider is listening to that stresses. They know what a fly caught in the web feels like. And they'll also know if you're just touching it, that's a false alarm, but the fly, okay, that's a signal, I'm gonna go and do something. Well, the same way our fibroblasts are listening to the tension in the collagen scaffold. And when you put a certain tension into that, after a while, and according to Helene's research, it takes about 20 minutes, the cell will react. When I stretch the web, I'm actually stretching the fibroblast. The cell itself is becoming elongated. And after 20 minutes of that, it starts to release certain chemical messengers called cytokines. One is ATP, which normally inside the cell is like a little battery. It's a little source of energy, but outside the cell, it's a communication signal. So now these fibroblasts start to release chemical messengers from these stretches. In one article that Helene wrote, she showed the needle going in and she showed an artist's conception of the collagen fibers getting wrapped around the needle, but she also showed somebody doing triangle pose. And the same thing is happening. When we're doing triangle pose, the collagen fibers are getting elongated and the fibroblasts are also becoming elongated. Now, the thing is, we don't hold triangle pose for 20 minutes, like a needle in there. But in yin yoga, we might hold a stretch for, say, like the inner legs. You might do butterfly for 5 minutes. You feel the stretch in the inner legs. Then you do straddle fold. You might feel then you might do half butterfly. So over time, you might spend 20 minutes stretching that area out, in which case we can hypothesize that these fibroblasts are reacting to the mechanical transduction. And we've known this since the 1850s. Cells listen to these mechanical signals and they transform them into biological changes. But one of the ways we think acupuncture works is by physically creating a stress on the cells within the tissues, and the cells are reacting via mechanical transduction and doing certain biochemical changes. The second thing that we think might work is something called piezoelectricity, or stress-generated electrical potentials. Go back to the bone example I talked before. If you were to bend a bone like a femur, and the top of the femur starts to get elongated, the bottom of the femur, the bottom side of the bend, gets compressed. Well, that separates charges, little ionic charges inside the bone. And most electricity in the body is ionic electricity. It's the movement of ions. And that creates a voltage across here, which attracts other cells to the area to help adjust this tissue to make it healthier, stronger, more able to handle that. So that's why doctors who say if you got osteoporosis, you need to compress the bones. You need to do a lot of walking. Bones are stimulated through compression. Cartilage is stimulated through compression. Bones can also be stimulated through tension. Ligaments and tendons are only stimulated through tension. So depending on the mechanotransduction that you're applying, you're creating these little electrical currents. Well, it turns out as you twist the needle, you also may be creating a piezoelectric current. Now, electricity flows well through water-filled spaces. Water is a great conductor of electricity. Actually, pure water, distilled water, is not. It's a resistor. But if you put a little salt in there, some calcium ions, potassium, sodium, then the electricity flows very easily through here. So as you start to insert the needle, you might be creating a mechanical stress, and through mechanical transduction, that's a particular type of signal. But you also may be creating these ionic currents or piezoelectric currents, which will flow through these channels. Now, as Helene Langevin has shown, and Dr. Moriyama has shown, these channels are not the muscle sinews. They're not the muscle and the tendons. They're in the fascial wrappers around the muscle tendon groups, and it's actually in the water. All these boundaries are lubricated with water, and that is the conducting line of the classical organ meridians. So the theory is that you're creating these little piezoelectric currents, and those currents are actually flowing through the conductive interfaces and are ending up somewhere else. So I do believe that you can stimulate electrical currents through the classic meridians, not through the sinew channels, but through the organ channels. And one last little thing to put on the buffet table here. There's a type of current the body generates when it's damaged. It's called the injury repair potential. So if you cut yourself, there's a separation of the ions, and that creates a voltage. Well, actually, every day there's a voltage in our tissues. The inside of the cell is negative to the outside of the cell because the inside of the cell has negative ions, the outside has positive ions. And we have sort of proteins on the surface of the cell that are regulating this. And when the time's right, they open up a channel and these ions can switch directions. Same thing happens in our tissues themselves. Healthy tissues have a voltage of about minus 50 millivolts. If you cut this area, the cut area drops down to 0. So now we have difference between the voltage in the healthy cell, healthy tissues, and no voltage in the damaged tissues. That voltage creates a current. And that current is a signal to mobile cells like white blood cells to come in here and take away bad guys, infections, bacteria, but also stem cells will migrate there. Fibroblasts will go there and lay down a scaffold of scar tissue, and it'll help over time to rebuild that whole area. So this is the injury repair current or potential. But if you actually put a needle into a spot and you twist it, the theory is you're stimulating an injury. We haven't actually injured the area, but we're affecting the voltage there. And the body reacts as if I'm damaged, so it sends healing there. But imagine if that signal actually happens to be on one of these conduits, these channels that connects up to the heart. Now the heart cells are getting the signal that you're damaged. Well, let's heal. Well, the heart's not really damaged, and the signal's originating from far away, but it's coming through these water-filled spaces. The electric current is going down here, and it's sending out the heal me signal. So that's another way we speculate that acupuncture can work. Now, we don't do acupuncture, but we do acupressure. And that can create the piezoelectric currents that we talked about. Just like when we do bending the bone, when you create a stress along the tissues and these currents, these conductive lines happen to fall within where the stress is, those piezoelectric currents are going to start to flow to other areas of the body. So this is how we believe acupressure works. So even though we're not using acupuncture and we're not leaving the needles in for as long, we are creating acupressure, which could create these stress-generated electrical potentials, which can flow through these water-filled conduits and reach tissues far away, which may signal them, hey, we're damaged, let's heal.
I
So
think it's a
there's a lot
languaging
of
thing.
theoretical background to understanding this, but whether it really happens or not, we haven't done any experiments to show that it actually happens. It's some hypotheses that are well-founded. So
Yeah.
that's why I had to say it may be happening.
I think it's a language thing with the term acupressure, because acupressurists or people who do shiatsu or medical qigong are doing acupressure in the way that an acupuncturist would be using a needle. They're
Right.
doing a pressure on a point, sometimes stimulating it, sometimes tapping. In Chinese medicine, there's, Tui Na, there's like a kind of, it's a gross oversimplification to call Tui Na Chinese massage, but it has elements of that. And
Right.
so I think I'm not comfortable saying that my yin yoga pose is giving me acupressure, because to me and to the people that practice it, acupressure is again, there's an intake, there's a diagnosis, there's a point by point manual stimulation like you would with a needle, but without the needle. Whereas I do believe in yin, absolutely we're affecting our meridians. How could we not be? The other thing I want to clarify is when I say sinew channels, I'm talking in the Chinese medicine version of sinew channels, not this kind of, anatomy trains-ish vibe.
Right.
When you study Chinese medicine, all of the 12 meridians have a sinew channel that corresponds. Some of them follow exactly the same pathway as the meridian, start to finish, and some stop a bit early. So for example, the liver, the sinew channel of the liver doesn't actually go all the way up onto the torso. It stops in the inner leg. And so for me, I always say to my students, now you cannot separate the sinew channel of the liver from the liver meridians. Like you can cut these apart and pull them apart. Of course, they're, interwoven, but that I feel like it's more accurate for me to say butterfly is going to affect the sinew channel of the liver than the whole liver meridian, because that to me is what we're accessing in a yin practice. So I think it's definitions of words. To me, I've become like you are with the word stress because you have your science background. Now that I have this Chinese medicine background, I'm like, whoa, can we stop saying that me doing my butterfly pose is the same as acupressure? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can say you create a stress to the inside of the legs.
Yeah.
That
And
the
thereby,
case, it's a tension stress, and that may cause ionic flows of energy, electricity, or piezoelectric flows of electricity through the water-filled spaces.
100% agree that, I mean, how could our yin practice not be affecting our meridians? I just am very careful with the language that I use because, so many, and I'm careful with it for one reason, because it's important to me, just like you're careful with your language on certain things, but also because, as we just discussed with the telephone game, someone is going to hear a teacher say something like, some people think that our yin yoga practice affects the meridians of our body like acupressure would, right? That could be an accurate statement, but someone's going to hear that and they're going to go, I don't need to go to acupuncture anymore. I'm just going to do my yin yoga practice and it's same. Or teachers will start teaching a whole bunch of meridian information when they've never studied Chinese medicine because they just, oversimplify things. So that was my resistance with that one. It was like, whoo, let's not use the word acupressure. Let's just say it. We can access the meridians of our body. So that to me feels more accurate.
At the end of the day, it's really, how do you feel?
Yes. Yeah.
Is this working for you? And then it's nice to know, yeah, it is working. Why is it working? I mean, that's the whole joy of science, is to try to figure out, okay, I have this result. Why do I think that result's happening?
Mm-hmm.
But who cares? If it feels good, if you do yin yoga and you feel much better for it, great. That's all you need to know.
And I have a theory, and it's just my own personal theory. This is not backed in science at all, everybody. So don't be, hold me to this for the rest of my life. But that, one of the reasons that if we're looking at a spectrum of still versus movement yoga, that yin feels very different to the nervous system in my own body and what I witness in my students than maybe a yang form of yoga. That there's that yin thing, that vibe that happens after yin class that's kind of hard to explain or put your finger on it, but we've all felt it, right? We've all been after a really good yin practice and just been like, whoa. And I also teach restorative yoga and have a lot of training in restorative. And I would say that that yin zen, I'm going to call it for lack of a better word, that yin vibe is also different than the relaxation you get from a restorative practice. That these
Right.
three things feel very different in our bodies and our nervous system. And my personal theory is that because in yin, we are accessing the sinew channels, aka thereby also the meridian in whole or part, that's why yin has this different feeling. Of course, you could do a qigong practice and access your meridians. Obviously, we
Yeah.
can't move without accessing our meridian, but it is this relationship with the meridian and then the sinew channel in yin that is so unique because of the time and that fascia release that I feel like, and again, all theory on my part, that we're sort of bathing in our meridian, for lack of a better word, for a longer period of time. And that's why, because of our accessing the sinew channels, which again are connected, releasing of the sinew channel and accessing the meridian in that deeper way is what gives that sort of yin glow afterwards. But this is just all conjecture and
Yeah.
theory on my
Yeah.
part.
Cool.
Yeah. Because I think anyone who's done a lot of yin knows there's a feeling mentally, emotionally, nervous system wise that is quite unique. Like it definitely has its
Right.
own magic. And that's just my theory as to what it is.
And that's why they keep coming back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then my last one before we move into some really quick closing questions. Sorry, this interview has kept you a little longer. Are you okay to go for a couple more minutes?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Let's go.
What's the deal with the ocean breath? Are you referring to Ujjayi and just calling it ocean breath? And if so, what is the energetic goal of Ujjayi? And does it feel like a match for a yin practice? And is this your former Ashtanga practice coming into the yin? And the reason I speculate on this is because as somebody who comes from a lineage where they don't focus on Ujjayi, and also with Paul, he never guides Ujjayi or ocean breath or anything during practice. He just kind of is like, just breathe. But I noticed that you focus on it. I think Sarah also mentions it in her book. And I know
Yeah.
both of you have an Ashtanga background. So it's like, is there a link to, cultivating this breath and bringing it into your yin practice based on your former practice?
Well, Paul also has an Ashtanga background and a hot yoga background. He
All the
ran a hot
backgrounds,
yoga
yes.
studio. But yeah, I call it that for two reasons. One is to not associate it with the Ashtanga Darth Vader Ujjayi.
Gotcha.
I call it that because Max Strom, who's a wonderful yoga teacher, he wrote a book, Breathing, or I can't remember the exact name of it, but he calls it ocean breath in there. And I just like the poetic sound of that. So it's a very soft Ujjayi. Well, the whole point of Ujjayi to me, forget the Ashtanga reasons, is to slow down the breath. Way back in 2009, I think it was, I went to a conference in LA, the International Association of Yoga Therapists. They have these fairly technical conferences.
I was formerly a member until recently.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this year they had a presentation by Dr. Luciano Bernardi at the University of Pavia in Italy. And he was talking about breath. He studied breath. He studied monks and nuns in the Vatican chanting Ave Maria. He studied nuns and monks in Tibet doing Om Mani Padme Om. And he found some amazing effects when you slow the breath down to a 10-second cycle. That's inhale to the count of 4, pause, exhale to the count of 4, pause. When you do that, I won't go into all the findings he had, but it affects your heart rate variability, your blood oxygenation, reducing hyperventilation, improving your barrel reflex, which is dealing with blood pressure. All these wonderful benefits came from just slowing the breath down. So my view of the ocean breath is just to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system. That's in effect what it is.
Gotcha.
Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest. It's the feed and breed type things. Everything's calm. But it's a bit like a light switch. When you turn the lights off, you don't have to turn them off again. So once you've done this ocean breath for 2 minutes at the beginning of a practice, you don't have to keep doing it. It'd be like going up the light switch and keep turning it off. You're already off. The parasympathetic nervous system is turned on. the flight or flight sympathetic nervous system is turned off, you can just leave it that way. So generally in all the classes I teach for yin yoga, we'll do 2 minutes of just simple movements, like a 3-part Taoist breath or a 4-part Taoist breath, or just centering movements. And basically while I'm doing this, I'm counting myself: inhale, 2, 3, 4, pause, exhale, 2, 3, 4, pause. Now the students don't know that. I'm just guiding them through this slow moving breath. I don't refer to it as ujjayi, because a lot of people know ujjayi, and then they'll start to do that through the whole class. They'll do Darth Vader.
That's
I just
why I
want to do
asked,
it.
because I find that happens all the time in yin class, where people are obsessed, trained to do ujjayi, that they'll be doing it through the whole yin practice. And I'm constantly having to kind of like, hey, you can just breathe. Like, you know, yeah.
So I just call it the ocean breath, because they don't know what that is. Do it for 2 minutes. And I don't even tell them why. We just start that way. The lights are turned off. People are in the parasympathetic mode.
Gotcha.
And then we go to the class.
So the point of it for you, the intention is, let's get into our parasympathetic so that we can really actually explore this practice. I do similar not similar breath techniques, but I do also offer breath techniques and awareness for the same reason at the start, that let's just fully arrive first. And now we can make funny shapes with our body.
Because you never know where the students have come from.
Totally.
What sort of state of mind they're in. So
you can feel it sometimes, but
yeah.
As they walk in vibrating,
Now, sometimes people, because their mind goes into things, they might get into an anxious state. And halfway through the class, they may have re-triggered their sympathetic nervous system. So for those people, they might need to do that breath again. But I generally don't mention it again after the start.
Beautiful. Thank you for that clarification. We are at the fun part of the interview now, where I'm just going to ask you some random questions.
All right.
Very non-technical and very personal. Not very personal, but nothing that you won't feel comfortable sharing, I don't think. The first one, coffee or tea?
Oh, I hate coffee. I tried it once when I was 10 years old. Couldn't stand it. So never tried it again. So tea for me, please.
Do you have a favorite ice cream flavor, whether that's dairy or non-dairy?
I do, chocolate, but as much as I love chocolate, it doesn't love me. It's an unrequited love. I get migraines from too much caffeine. So,
do you have a backup flavor?
Vanilla.
Yeah.
It's yin and yang.
Yeah, there you go. One thing people often get wrong about me.
Maybe they think I'm an extrovert, because I tend to talk a lot. In my classes, I just won't shut up. And put me in front of a group of people and I talk and talk and talk. But in my private life, I'm very introverted. I don't go out. I don't socialize. I'm just on my own. I'm happy.
People think the same of me often. They think because I had to become well socialized in my careers, that because I'm comfortable talking to people and standing in front of people, and also can go on and on about something I'm excited about, that I must be an extrovert. But I'm like you, I'm actually very introverted. Yeah. Need plenty of alone time.
Yeah.
Do you have a pop culture vice? Like, is there a TV show or a podcast series or a series of books that like you're obsessed with?
I'm a sci-fi guy.
Nice.
I always grew up with the classics, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, and all that. And when I hit 30, I got out of that. But when I hit 60, I'm kind of getting back into it. So I like all the Star Trek, Star Wars, you name it.
Me too.
The Marvel universe. That's me.
I've been diving back into it as well. Yeah. When I'm not practicing yoga, I am?
I'm either playing golf or pickleball now, or reading.
Nice. One weird fact about you.
Weird. Well, I'm a Capricorn, born on December 25th. My mother's name is Mary. My father's name is Joseph.
Wow. That is kind of weird.
I do try to keep it quiet, because you know what happened last time.
It's like, shh. Yeah. You share a very auspicious birthday. What the world needs now is balance. Beware of the binary. It's all one way or all the other way. Somehow we have to see the other points of view and get back towards the middle. The nice thing about this yin yang symbol is it's not static. The yin is becoming yang, the yang is becoming yin. There's always a flow, the harmonizing.
Right. So
Yes.
balancing to me is never being in the middle. It's you're a little bit off balance and you correct, but then you overcorrect and you go back. So balancing is a verb. It's that flow back towards the center. And I feel like in modern culture, we've missed it. We've become polarized. We got
So
to get back to
polarized.
the center.
Agreed. I think it's the only way forward, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I wish, I know this is going to be hard to pick one thing. One thing I wish people knew about yin yoga.
It's for everybody.
Nice.
When I started teaching yin yoga in Vancouver, I was teaching at a place called City Yoga. This was before Semperviva bought them out. It was an Ashtanga place. None of the Ashtangis wanted to do yin yoga. The point of Ashtanga is to get to the next series. So if you do first series, you got to get second series and advanced A and B. But once I explained to them how yin yoga helped me get to the second series faster, because I could
Then
do
they were in.
Prasarita Padotas, and then they said, okay, teach me about that.
I also used to teach yin at an Ashtanga studio. It was very interesting. Yeah. Is there anything else that I forgot to ask you that you'd like to add?
I think that's enough for this one. Maybe we can do another one day and
I'd
do
love
all
that.
the other stuff. But,
Yes.
I mean, these books are pretty dense, so it's hard to get through everything in just one session.
Oh, 100%. Yes, I'd love that. Let's have you back. All right. Well, I think you and I can say our proper goodbyes once I hit stop record. But for those of you that are listening or watching, thanks for coming and bye for now.
Ciao.